Black girl hid an injured Hell's Angel from a violent gang. What 500 bikers did left her in tears. The rain came down sideways that night in Comfort, Georgia, the kind of rain that turns a two-lane road into a black mirror. And out of that darkness, they came. Headlights, dozens of them, then hundreds. Rolling slow, engines growling low like something ancient waking up, chrome catching the streetlights, leather glistening wet. 500 motorcycles moving as one long silver river down Route 9, straight toward a little cinder-block garage with a hand-painted sign that read, Fontaine Auto Repair. A woman stood in the doorway of that garage, one hand raised, palm out, like she could stop 500 machines with nothing but her will. Behind her, in an old recliner dragged in from the office, sat an old white man with a bandage wrapped around his skull and a look on his face like he was watching a funeral, and a homecoming happened at the same time. That was the moment. That was the night everything in Comfort, Georgia changed. But to understand it, you have to go back 3 days. Odessa Fontaine had grease under her fingernails the way other women had manicures, permanent, familiar, hers. 34 years old, 5'6" in boots that had outlived 2 presidents, and hands that could rebuild a transmission blindfolded because her daddy taught her that way, on purpose, back when she was 19 and grieving her mama and needed something to do with her hands besides cry. Grief don't leave you empty, Des, Papa Fontaine used to say, wiping his hands on a rag that never quite came clean. It leaves you room. What you put in that room is up to you. He'd put engines in hers. And when the cancer took him too, 6 years back, he left her the shop, the debt on the shop, and a town full of people who still called her Ray Fontaine's girl, like she hadn't been running the place solo since she was 28. Comfort. Georgia was the kind of town where everybody's business belonged to everybody. Population 1,100, one blinking light, a Baptist church on every corner, it felt like, and a sheriff's department with exactly 4 deputies, none of whom hurried for calls that came from the black side of town, and everybody knew it, and nobody said it out loud except at Sunday dinner behind closed doors. Odessa didn't complain about that. She just built her life around it, trusted her neighbors, trusted Pastor Ezekiel Whitlow down at Mount Nebo Baptist, who'd preached her daddy's funeral with tears in his own eyes, trusted her cousin Thaddeus, who worked the front counter and could sweet-talk a payment plan out of anybody. Didn't trust much else outside that circle. The shop itself was a kind of scripture to her, every tool hung on its outline on the pegboard, the way her daddy had traced them in marker back in 1994, so nothing ever went missing or unaccounted for. The old Coca-Cola clock above the register still ran 4 minutes slow, and she'd never had it fixed, because fixing it felt like erasing him a little more. His reading glasses still sat in the drawer under the register. His handwriting was still on half the invoices in the filing cabinet. Block letters, engine numbers, customer names going back 2 decades, Deacon Willis's truck, Miss Odell's Buick, the church van that broke down every August like clockwork. She had almost lost the shop twice. Once when the bank came calling on her daddy's loan 6 months after the funeral, before she understood the books well enough to fight back. Once when a big chain repair shop opened up off the interstate with prices that undercut her by half, backed by money that didn't care if it bled for 2 years before it turned a profit. Both times the town had shown up for her without being asked. Deacon Willis paying full price when he didn't have to, Miss Odell telling everybody at church that Ray's girl does it right, don't none of y'all go to that highway place. A slow, steady loyalty that kept the lights on. Odessa never forgot debts like that. She carried them the way she carried her daddy's tools, with care, and with the understanding that some things you pay forward, not back. That was the frame she saw the whole world through. You helped who needed helping. You trusted your own judgment over a system that had never once in her lifetime been built with people like her in mind, and you didn't leave anything, or anyone, broken down in a ditch if you had it in you to do something about it. Which is why what happened on a Tuesday night in October made no sense to anybody who thought they knew her. She was closing up. 8:40, rain already starting, the kind of drizzle that Georgia does in autumn that isn't quite a storm, but soaks you anyway. She'd just cut the lights in the bay when she saw something through the wet glass of the garage door window. A shape, low to the ground, not moving right. Her first thought was a dog, hit by a car, dragging itself off the road. She'd seen that before, more times than she wanted to count on this stretch of Route 9. She grabbed a flashlight and her daddy's old tire iron. Habit, not fear. Though maybe some fear, too. A woman alone at night learns to carry something. And went out into the rain. It wasn't a dog. It was a man. Big man. Or had been big once, now curled small, the way pain makes even big men small. Gray beard soaked flat against his jaw, leather vest dark with rain and something darker underneath it, blood matting into silver hair at his temple. A motorcycle, or what used to be one, lay twisted in the ditch grass 20 feet off, back wheel still spinning slow, like it hadn't quite accepted it was done. "Hey!" Odessa dropped to her knees in the mud, not thinking twice, the way you don't think twice about a hurt thing. "Hey, mister, can you hear me?" His eyes opened. Pale blue, glassy with pain, and old, older than his face, like they'd seen things his face was too tired to remember. "They're coming back," he rasped. "Please, they said they'd come back and finish it." "Who's coming back?" "Mister, I need to call an ambulance. You're bleeding bad." His hand shot up and grabbed her wrist. Strong, for a man half-conscious in a ditch. "No police, no ambulance. Please, miss. They got eyes on the hospital. They got eyes on everything with a light on it." His voice cracked. "I ain't got long for they figure I ain't dead yet." Odessa knelt there in the rain with a stranger's blood on her hands, and every practical bone in her body told her to override him, to call somebody, to not get involved in whatever this was. Her daddy's voice came to her clear as if he were standing right there in the ditch with her. "You don't ask a drowning man his politics before you throw the rope, Des." "Okay," she said. "Okay. Can you stand?" She got his arm over her shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, all bone and old muscle, and half carried, half dragged him across the lot, through the rain, into the warm dark of the garage bay. She locked the door behind them, killed the outside lights, sat him down in the busted recliner Thaddeus kept back there for lunch breaks, and got the first aid kit down off the shelf where it had sat, mostly unused, since her daddy stocked it. "What's your name?" she asked, cutting his shirt sleeve away from a gash that ran deep along his forearm. "Silas," he said. "Silas Boone." "Well, mister, Boone, you're gonna need stitches a Band-Aid ain't gonna handle, but I can slow the bleeding till you tell me what in God's name happened to you." He laughed, short and pained, more cough than laugh. "Ambush. Simple as that. Rode out alone tonight. Shouldn't have. My boys told me not to. But I thought I could still talk sense into a man who lost the taste for sense a long time ago." He winced as she pressed gauze to his temple. "5 of 'em. Waited for me on the county road past the old Baptist camp. Ran me off, then came at me on foot once I went down." "Why? Who are you to anybody that they'd do that?" Silas Boone looked at her then. Really looked. The way a man looks when he's deciding how much truth a stranger has earned. "That," he said quietly, "is a longer story than the one you got time for tonight, Miss Fontaine. Odessa Fontaine." "Miss Fontaine," he nodded, like the name settled something in him. "You got a phone?" "I do." "Don't use it. Not yet. Not for me." His eyes drifted to the window, to the dark road beyond it, rain streaking sideways in the glow of a single street lamp. "They think I'm dead in that ditch. Let 'em think it one more night. Come morning, I'll figure how to get word to my people without bringing a war to your front door." "A war. Ma'am, I do not exaggerate for effect. Never have. A war." Odessa sat back on her heels, tire iron still within reach on the concrete floor beside her, blood drying on her hands, and looked at this stranger, this old white biker with a torn-up leather vest and a voice like gravel and honey, sitting in her dead father's garage, telling her in plain words that helping him might cost her more than she knew. She thought about her daddy, about the room grief leaves you, and what you put in it. She worked in silence for a while after that, cleaning the wound along his temple, taping gauze over the worst of it, splinting 2 fingers on his left hand that had been bent back wrong in the fall. Silas didn't flinch much, didn't complain, just watched her work with the quiet attention of a man used to sizing people up by their hands rather than their words. "You got a steady grip," he said finally. "Your daddy teach you that?" Odessa's hands paused, just for a second, over the gauze. How you know I had a daddy teach me anything? Coulda learned it myself. Coulda, Silas agreed. But you didn't. I can see it in how you hold the tape. Same way I hold a wrench my own daddy handed me 60 years back. That's not self-taught. That's passed down. He winced as she tied off the bandage. I'm not wrong often about things like that. He passed 6 years ago, Odessa said, quieter than she meant to. Cancer. This was his shop. I'm sorry for your loss. Everybody's sorry, don't fix the books. She stood, gathering the bloodied gauze into a plastic bag, business brisk again, like she'd let something show she hadn't meant to. You said a name back there. Before you passed out fully, you said something about a debt. What kind of debt gets a man left for dead on Route 9? Silas was quiet a long moment, staring at his splinted fingers like they belonged to somebody else. The kind that goes back further than either of us been alive, some of it, he said. The kind that started as brothers and turned into something uglier when money and pride got mixed into it. I built something a long time ago, Miss Fontaine. Built it out of nothing, with men who had nothing else. And some of the men I built it with decided somewhere along the way that nothing wasn't enough anymore. He looked up at her. I came out tonight to try and talk peace to a man who don't want peace. He wants what I got, and he's decided the fastest way to get it is to make sure I'm not around to say no. That's still not a name. A ghost of a smile moved under his beard. You're your daddy's girl, all right. Don't let go of a thing till you got the whole of it. He shifted in the recliner, wincing. Name's Dutch Callahan. Used to ride with me. Used to be closer to me than my own blood, if I'm honest. Now he's decided closer don't count for much. His eyes found hers, steady despite the pain. You let that name sit with you tonight, Miss Fontaine, and you tell me in the morning if you still want a stranger's trouble parked in your garage. I won't hold it against you either way. All right, Mr. Boone, she said, standing, wiping her hands on a rag that would never come fully clean, same as her father's never had. One night, you stay hid, you stay quiet, and come morning, we figure out what kind of trouble I just invited into my shop. He closed his eyes, breath shuddering out of him, some tension leaving his shoulders that had nothing to do with pain. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet. Odessa moved to the window, cracked the blinds, looked out at the empty, wet road. Something tells me the thanking comes later, if it comes at all. She spent the next hour building him a bed out of old moving blankets in the back office, the one with no windows, where the smell of motor oil hung thickest, and the only sound was the drip of rain off the eaves outside. She brought him water, a plate of crackers and cheese from the little fridge she kept for lunch breaks, and a flashlight in case the power flickered like it always did in a storm. You got family gonna be looking for you? She asked, standing in the doorway. Wife? Kids? Somebody I ought to be worried is worrying? Something crossed his face, brief and heavy. Wife's been gone 11 years. Kids. I got a daughter don't speak to me, and that's a different story for a different night if you're still speaking to me come morning. He managed a tired smile. But I got 500 men who'll turn this county upside down if they think something happened to me and don't know where to look. That's the family that matters right now. And that's exactly why I can't let word get out too fast. A man like Dutch, he's counting on my boys finding out I'm dead before they find out I'm not. Counting on grief making them reckless. I need time to get word out the right way to the right people before this turns into something can't be undone. 500 men, Odessa repeated slowly, like she was trying the number on for size. That's not a motorcycle club, Mr. Boone. That's an army. We prefer family, Silas said. But I won't argue the word army. Not on nights like tonight. She left him there in the dark with his water and his crackers and his splinted hand, and she walked back out into the empty garage, locking the office door gently behind her. Not to trap him, but out of an old habit her daddy had. Locking up anything precious before he could let himself worry about it overnight. She didn't sleep in her own bed that night. She sat up in the front office in her daddy's old rolling chair, tire iron across her lap, watching the rain streak down the window and the empty road beyond it, replaying a name over and over in her head. Dutch Callahan. She didn't know it yet, couldn't have known it, not that first night. But that name was about to become the most talked about name in 3 counties, and her shop, Her daddy's shop, the one she'd fought 2 banks and 1 highway chain to keep standing, was about to become the center of something so much bigger than a stranger bleeding in a ditch. She thought about calling Thaddeus just to hear a familiar voice, but decided against it. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone stayed, at least until morning gave her a clearer head to think with. Instead, she sat with her memories, the way grief sometimes made her do on quiet nights like this one, replaying small moments of her daddy the way other people replayed old songs. She remembered him teaching her to change her first tire at 11 years old, hands over her hands on the lug wrench, patient even when she stripped a bolt and cried from frustration. "Ain't about getting it right the first time, Des," he'd told her, wiping grease off her cheek with his thumb. "It's about not walking away from something just 'cause it's hard." She remembered him at church every single Sunday without fail, singing off-key and loud and unashamed in the second pew, because he said the Lord didn't care about pitch, only about whether you showed up and meant it. She remembered him in his last months, thin and tired in ways engines couldn't fix, still coming down to the shop most days just to sit in this same rolling chair and watch her work, telling her she had good hands, telling her the shop would be fine, telling her she would be fine, long after both of them understood he wouldn't be around to see it proven true. You don't walk away from something just 'cause it's hard. Maybe that was why she hadn't hesitated in the rain 3 hours ago. Maybe that lesson had been waiting 6 years for exactly this kind of night to prove itself. Somewhere past midnight, headlights swept slow across the front window. Odessa's whole body went still. The lights paused, idled for 10 long seconds outside the dark garage, then moved on, taillights fading red into the rain. She didn't breathe easy again until they were gone. Outside, the rain kept falling. And somewhere out past the tree line, on a road running black and slick under a sky with no stars in it, 5 men who thought they'd left a dead man in a ditch were driving back toward town to make sure of it. They didn't know yet that the dead man was very much alive. They didn't know yet that a mechanic named Odessa Fontaine had just made a choice that would bring 500 motorcycles rolling down Route 9 before the week was out. And they surely didn't know, not yet, exactly whose blood was drying under her fingernails, or what name that blood belonged to among men who rode leather and carried old debts like Scripture. They were about to find out. Because in Comfort, Georgia, some doors, once opened, don't close again. Not until the truth walks all the way through them. By Thursday morning, Comfort, Georgia was talking about one thing. Odessa heard it first from Miss Odell, who came by the shop for her Buick's oil change and stood at the counter with her purse clutched to her chest like she was delivering Scripture. "They found a motorcycle wrecked out past the old Baptist camp," Miss Odell said, eyes wide. "Sheriff's boys towed it off Tuesday night. No body, though. Folks saying whoever it was must have crawled off somewhere and died in the woods, or got taken." Odessa kept her face still, the way she'd learned to keep it still over years of hearing gossip she couldn't touch. "That's so." "That's so. And Miss Odell lowered her voice, leaned in close. "They sayin' it's one of them Iron Shepherds. You know, that big motorcycle club rides through here every few months. All them leather vests and flags. Saying it might be somebody important." Behind the counter, Thaddeus glanced over at his cousin, one eyebrow raised just slightly. He didn't know what was in the back office. Nobody knew, except Odessa, who'd told him only that a customer's car had broken down, and she was handling something private, a lie thin enough that Thaddeus, God bless him, chose not to pull at the thread. "I'm sure the sheriff's got it handled," Odessa said, and rang up Miss Odell's total, and smiled the smile she'd learned from her daddy. Pleasant, closed, giving away nothing. But her hands were shaking a little when Miss Odell left. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since Tuesday. Silas's wounds were healing slower than either of them liked. The gash on his temple had needed actual stitches, which she'd done herself with a sterilized needle and thread from her sewing kit and a bottle of her daddy's old whiskey for both disinfectant and nerve, his and hers both. "You did good work," Silas told her Wednesday night, running 2 fingers along the neat line of stitches like he was inspecting a weld. "You missed your calling. Could have been a surgeon." "I fix transmissions, Mr. Boone. Man parts and car parts got more in common than you'd think. You just got to know what's supposed to be connected to what." He'd laughed at that, a real laugh, the first one she'd heard out of him, and something had eased between them in that laugh, the wariness of two strangers thinning down into something closer to trust. He told her more, over those 2 days, piece by piece. The way a man tells a story he's ashamed took him this long to tell right. The Iron Shepherds weren't some outlaw gang, he explained. They'd started 40 years back as a handful of Vietnam vets who couldn't find their footing back home, banding together because the world outside their unit didn't know what to do with them, and they didn't know what to do with the world. Over 4 decades, it had grown into something else entirely. 500 members strong across a dozen chapters, most of them veterans, tradesmen, men who'd fallen through every crack the system had to offer and found brotherhood instead of falling all the way through. They ran toy drives every Christmas in 6 different counties, escorted funeral processions for fallen soldiers and police officers, free of charge, rain or shine, built wheelchair ramps for elderly veterans who couldn't afford contractors. It wasn't the image most folks carried in their heads when they saw the leather and the flags roll through town. And Silas Boone, its founder and long-standing president, had spent 40 years trying to make sure the good outweighed the reputation. Dutch Callahan rode with me from the start, Silas said, staring at the ceiling of the dark back office. Vietnam together, started the club together back when it was 6 of us and one busted-up garage not much bigger than yours. He was my brother before he was anything else. What happened? Money happened, and time. Silas's jaw tightened. About 8 years back, we started getting offers, contracts, real money, from folks wanted us running security and transport for things that weren't exactly legal. Dutch wanted in, said it was time the club started actually profiting off all the respect we'd built. I said no, said we built this thing to help people, not to become the kind of outfit folks got good reason to fear. He shook his head slow. Dutch didn't take that well. Split off, took near 80 men with him, called themselves the Blackthorn Riders. Been a thorn in my side, pardon the pun, ever since. Running half-legal operations up and down 3 states, using our old colors' reputation to open doors, then closing those doors with something meaner once they're through 'em. And the ambush? Word's been coming to me for months that Dutch was running something serious through Comfort, using this stretch of road as a corridor, and using our name to smooth it over with folks who might have asked more questions of a club called Blackthorn than a club called Iron Shepherds. I came out here alone, against my own counsel's advice, to tell him face-to-face that it stops, or I go public with what I know and let the law sort it. Man doesn't take well to ultimatums. Silas's hand drifted to the bandage at his temple. Guess I got my answer. Odessa sat with that for a long moment, the shop quiet around them except for the tick of the slow clock and the distant hum of a truck passing on Route 9. If your own men find out you're alive, she said slowly, what happens? They come looking. And when 500 men who love a fella like a father start looking, Miss Fontaine, they don't look quiet. Comfort's a small town. It won't stay small once that many engines roll through it. He looked at her, guilt plain on his weathered face. I should have moved on already. Found somewhere else to hole up, somewhere don't put your name or your shop anywhere near this. I'm sorry I didn't think that through better before I dragged myself onto your property. You didn't drag yourself anywhere, Odessa said. You collapsed in a ditch. I'm the one who dragged you in here. Semantics. Fact. She stood, restless, pacing the small office. But you're right about one thing. This can't stay quiet forever. You need a doctor that ain't gonna ask questions, and your people need to know you're alive before something worse happens. Either to you, or to somebody else Dutch decides is in his way. Friday morning, everything changed. Odessa was under a Ford pickup halfway through a brake job when she heard the bell over the shop door jingle and Thaddeus's voice go careful and tight. Help you, gentlemen? She rolled out from under the truck. 3 men stood in her garage bay. Leather vests, patches she didn't recognize, a black thorn crown stitched over crossed pistons, road dust and hard eyes. The one in front was younger, maybe 40, with a shaved head and a scar bisecting one eyebrow. We're looking for information, he said, voice pleasant in a way that made the hair on Odessa's arms stand up. Bike went down out past the Baptist camp Tuesday night. Friend of ours. We're trying to figure what happened to him. Ain't heard nothing about that, Odessa said, wiping her hands on a rag, keeping her voice as level as she could manage with her heart slamming against her ribs. Sheriff towed a wreck through here Wednesday. That's the extent of what I know. The man's eyes moved past her, slow, deliberate, taking in the shop, the bay, the office door at the back, closed. Mind if we take a look around? Sometimes a man wanders hurt, finds shelter wherever he can. Wouldn't want to think somebody in this town was hiding something from us. That'd be a real shame for everybody involved. This is private property, Thaddeus said, stepping up beside his cousin, jaw set. You got a warrant, or you got a reason to be standing in my family's shop? The man smiled, slow and without warmth. Just being neighborly. Asking around's all. His eyes settled back on Odessa, and something in them made her stomach drop. You have a good day now, miss. We'll be around. Comfort's a small town. Man could get lost in it real easy. Or found, depending who's looking. They left, unhurried, boots loud on the concrete, engines roaring to life outside a moment later, 3 motorcycles pulling away down Route 9 in the direction of town. Odessa stood frozen for a full 10 seconds after they'd gone. Then she walked straight to the back office and locked the door behind her. They were here, she said, voice tight. 3 of Dutch's men, right here in the shop, asking questions. Silas was on his feet, unsteady, but on his feet, hand braced against the wall. They see anything? No, but they know something's off. They're going to be watching this place now. She ran a hand over her face, mind racing. Mr. Boone, I can't keep pretending this is just about you and Dutch anymore. My cousin works here. My customers come through that door every day. If those men decide this shop's worth tearing apart looking for you, I know. His voice was heavy with something like shame. I know, and I am sorrier than I can say. You didn't sign up for this. No, Odessa agreed. I didn't. She met his eyes, steady despite the fear still hammering in her chest. But I also didn't sign up to leave a man for dead in a ditch, and I'm not about to start now just 'cause it got hard. We need to get word to your people. Today. Before Dutch's men come back with more than questions. Silas was quiet a moment, thinking. The calculation of a man who'd led 500 souls for 4 decades visible behind his tired eyes. There's a man, he said finally, Marcus Whitfield. Goes by preacher in the club. Used to be an actual preacher, matter of fact, before he found us. He's my second, my most trusted. If anybody can get word out quiet and get the right people moving without starting a war in the streets, it's him. He looked at Odessa. But reaching him means using a phone, and a phone can be traced, and if Dutch has got eyes on the cell towers, same as he's got eyes on the hospital. Then we don't use my phone, Odessa said, already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead the way her daddy taught her to think through any repair. Find the failure point before you touch a single tool. We use somebody Dutch doesn't know exists. Somebody outside this whole mess. She thought of Pastor Whitlow, thought of the church van that broke down every August, of the trust built over 6 years of honest work and honest prices, of a man who'd stood over her daddy's casket and promised the whole congregation that the Fontaine family would never walk through hard times alone. I know somebody, she said. Give me an hour. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of the back office a moment longer than she needed to, watching Silas settle back onto the moving blankets, his face gray with exhaustion and something heavier than exhaustion. The particular weight of a man realizing the cost of his choices was landing on someone else's shoulders. Odessa, he said, not looking up, if this goes bad, if Dutch's men do something to you or your cousin because of me, I need you to know I never meant for Mr. Boone. She cut him off, not unkindly. My daddy used to say a man who apologizes for a storm he didn't start is wasting breath he could spend finding shelter. You didn't put that gash in your head? You didn't send those men to my garage? Dutch Callahan did that, and Dutch Callahan's the one going to answer for it one way or another. She grabbed her keys off the hook by the door. Now stay put, stay quiet, and let me go handle the shelter part. She left Silas locked in the back office with strict instructions not to move, not to make a sound, and drove straight to Mount Nebo Baptist Church, where Pastor Ezekiel Whitlow was found, as always on a Friday afternoon, in his study preparing Sunday's sermon, a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. He listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, hands steepled, and looked at her the way he'd looked at her over her daddy's casket. Steady, full of a faith that had weathered worse than this. "Odessa Fontaine," he said slowly. "Your daddy would be plenty proud and plenty terrified of you right now, both at the same time." He reached for the old rotary phone on his desk, the church's landline, the one that had rung with prayer requests and wedding announcements for 30 years, the one nobody watching cell towers would ever think to trace. "Give me the number. Let's see what kind of family this man's really got." While they waited on the connection, Pastor Whitlow poured Odessa a cup of the same cold coffee and studied her over the rim of his own cup with the patient eyes of a man who'd counseled half the town through its worst nights. "You scared?" he asked simply. "Terrified," Odessa admitted. It felt strange saying it out loud, strange to let the word exist outside her own head where she'd kept it locked up tight since Tuesday. "But I keep thinking about Daddy. How he'd never forgive me if I'd left that man in the ditch to save my own skin." "Your daddy was a good man," Whitlow said. "But your daddy also wasn't reckless, Odessa. There's a difference between doing right and doing right without a plan. What's your plan, once these bikers of his come rolling through?" Odessa didn't have a good answer for that, and the pastor's silence told her he knew it too. But before either of them could sit with the discomfort of that silence too long, the phone crackled to life on the other end. A gravelly voice thick with disbelief answering on the second ring, and the conversation that followed. Whitlow explaining calm and measured who was calling and why, the voice on the other end going quiet, then breaking, then hardening into something focused and fast, set in motion everything that was coming. "He's calling the club leadership now," Whitlow told her after he'd hung up, his own hands not quite steady. "Said they've had riders searching 3 counties since Tuesday night, half sick with grief, thinking the worst. Said—" The pastor paused, cleared his throat. "Said if what you're telling me is true, and Silas Boone really is alive because of a woman who took him in off the side of the road, then there ain't a debt in this world big enough to cover what your family's owed." His words, not mine. "I don't want a debt paid," Odessa said. "I want this to be over without anybody else getting hurt." "I know, child." Whitlow reached across the desk and took her hand, the way he had at her daddy's funeral, steady and warm. "But some things, once they're set in motion, don't stop till they run their course. All we can do now is pray you and that shop are standing when it does." That night, past midnight, Odessa sat once again in her daddy's old rolling chair, watching the empty road, waiting. The phone call had gone through. Marcus, Preacher, Whitfield had answered on the second ring, disbelief turning to raw emotion in his voice when Pastor Whitlow explained who was calling and why. Within the hour, word had gone out through channels Odessa didn't fully understand. Encrypted messages, trusted riders, a network built over 40 years of brotherhood, that Silas Boone was alive, hidden, and safe. For now. But safety, Odessa was learning fast, was a fragile, temporary thing in the world Silas Boone came from, because word that traveled to 500 loyal men could just as easily leak to men who weren't loyal at all. And somewhere out there, Dutch Callahan was still looking, still hunting, still convinced that the man he'd left for dead needed to actually be dead before sunrise came again. Odessa's phone buzzed on the counter beside her, an unknown number, a text message glowing in the dark. "We know he's alive. We know he's near you. You have one day to hand him over before we come get him ourselves. Don't make this about you too, sweetheart." Her blood ran cold. Behind her, the office door creaked open. Silas stood in the frame, pale, unsteady, one hand braced on the wall. "What is it?" he asked, seeing her face. Odessa turned the phone screen toward him without a word. Silas read the message once, twice, and something in his weathered face went hard and old and dangerous in a way she hadn't seen from him yet. Not fear, but fury, banked low and controlled. The fury of a man who'd spent 40 years building something good and was watching it get poisoned from the inside by a brother who'd traded loyalty for greed. "They found the shop," he said quietly. "God help me, Odessa. They found your shop." Outside, far off in the darkness past the tree line, headlights appeared on Route 9. Not one set, several, moving slow, deliberate, toward town, toward them. The headlights kept coming. Odessa counted them from the office window. 1, 2, 5, 7. Motorcycles rolling slow and deliberate down Route 9, engines throttled low in a way that felt more threatening than any roar could have been. They pulled into the gravel lot outside Fontaine Auto Repair and cut their engines all at once, plunging the night into a silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. "Get back," Silas said, already moving toward her despite his injuries, positioning his body between Odessa and the door out of some instinct 40 years of leadership had carved into his bones. "Whatever happens, you let me do the talking. This is my shop, Mr. Boone. And that's exactly why I need you alive to keep running it," he said, voice low and hard. "Please, Odessa, just this once." Boots crunched on gravel outside. A fist hammered on the metal garage door, 3 sharp knocks that echoed through the empty bay. "Fontaine!" A voice, rough, confident, carrying the particular weight of a man used to being obeyed. "I know he's in there. I can smell that old man's cheap cologne from the parking lot. Open up, or we open it for you." Odessa's hand found the tire iron on the counter, more reflex than plan. She looked at Silas, and something passed between them. Not quite agreement, but understanding. Thaddeus had gone home 2 hours before, unaware, and Odessa found herself grateful for that small mercy even as her pulse hammered in her ears. Whatever happened next, at least her cousin wouldn't be standing in the middle of it. "Stay behind me," she said, and walked to the door. She opened it to find Dutch Callahan standing in her gravel lot, flanked by 6 men in Blackthorn rider colors, rain-slicked pavement gleaming under the single working street lamp. He was older than she'd pictured, silver-bearded, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who'd spent a lifetime doing hard physical work, with eyes that might have once been kind but had long since curdled into something calculating and cold. "Miss Fontaine," Dutch said, almost pleasant, almost gentle, the tone of a man who believed manners cost him nothing and bought him plenty. "I believe you got something of mine." "Don't know what you're talking about." "Course you don't." Dutch's eyes moved past her, into the dim garage, and stopped on the figure standing in the shadow of the back office doorway. Something flickered across his face. Not quite shock, but close to it, the look of a man confronting a ghost he'd been sure he'd buried. "Well, I'll be damned. Silas Boone, you always were too stubborn to die proper." "Dutch!" Silas stepped fully into the light, standing as straight as his injuries allowed, and Odessa saw for the first time the full measure of the man he must have been before Tuesday night. Commanding, unshakable, a man 500 people had built their lives around trusting. "You could have just talked to me. 40 years, and you decide the answer's a ditch on the side of the road." "I decided the answer was whatever it took," Dutch said. And now the pleasant mask slipped, showing the raw thing underneath. "You think I wanted this? 40 years I rode beside you, Silas. 40 years I watched you get the credit, get the respect, get the club named after your vision while I did the work behind the curtain keeping it fed. And when I finally found something that could set every one of our families up for life, you shut it down like I was some kid who didn't know better. Because what you found was running guns and worse through counties full of people who trusted our colors to mean something good," Silas said, voice rising despite the visible pain it cost him. "I built the Shepherds to help people, Dutch, not to become the thing decent folks got reason to fear." "You built it," Dutch spat, "and the rest of us bled for it while you got to be the hero. I'm done being the man behind the curtain, old friend, and I'm through asking nice." "You had a family, Dutch," Silas said, quieter now, something almost sorrowful under the anger. "Real brothers. Men who would have bled for you same as they bled for me. And you traded all of it for a cut of something dirty because you couldn't stand watching somebody else get thanked for what you both built. That's not greed talking. That's pride. And pride's always been your weakness, same as it was in Da Nang, same as it was every time you couldn't let a slight go unanswered." "Don't you dare bring the war into this," Dutch said, voice cracking with something raw beneath the fury. "I bring it up because that's where I first learned I could trust you with my life," Silas said. "And I'm standing here 40 years later realizing I can't anymore. That's the part that actually hurts, Dutch. Not the ditch, not the ribs, that." For just a moment, something flickered across Dutch Callahan's face. Grief, maybe. Or the ghost of the young man he'd been before 4 decades of resentment calcified into this. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. He nodded once, sharp, to the men behind him. Two of them moved toward the garage door. What happened next happened fast, and Odessa would spend years afterward trying to piece the exact order of it together in her memory. The tire iron in her hand, swinging up on pure instinct as the first man reached for her. Silas lunging forward despite his injuries to put himself in the path of the second. The sudden blinding sweep of headlights flooding the gravel lot from the road behind them, so many and so bright that every man in that lot froze mid-motion, hands shading their eyes against the glare. Engines. Dozens of them. Then more. Rolling to a stop along Route 9 in a line that stretched back farther than the eye could follow into the darkness, headlights burning steady, silent, waiting. Preacher, Silas breathed. Something like relief and terror mixed together in his voice. A man dismounted from the lead motorcycle, tall, broad silver cross hanging over an iron shepherd's vest, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. Marcus Preacher Whitfield walked into the gravel lot flanked by 24 riders, and behind them, stretching back into the darkness, more engines idled, more headlights waited. Not 500, not yet, but enough. Enough to change the entire math of what was happening in that lot. "Dutch Callahan," Preacher said, voice carrying easy and clear across the sudden silence. "You got about 10 seconds to explain to me why you're standing in this good woman's parking lot fixing to finish what you started on Tuesday." Dutch's men had gone still, hands hovering near weapons. They suddenly understood themselves badly outnumbered to use. Dutch himself stood rigid, calculating, the arithmetic of the situation playing out visibly behind his eyes. "This isn't your business, Preacher," he said, but the confidence had drained clean out of his voice. "Man who tried to murder my president in cold blood on a county road made it my business," Preacher said. "Man who's been running guns and worse under colors he stole the reputation of made it every single one of our business." He gestured, and 2 riders moved forward, flanking Dutch on either side, close enough to make the threat plain without a single hand being raised. "We've known for months something was wrong, Dutch. Money moving where it shouldn't, contacts we didn't authorize. Silas wanted proof before he moved against you, wanted to believe there was still a version of you worth saving. Guess Tuesday night settled that particular debate." "You got no proof of anything," Dutch said, but his eyes had started darting, looking for an exit that wasn't there. "We got something better than proof," Silas said, stepping forward, despite Odessa's hand on his arm trying to hold him back. "We got witnesses. Miss Fontaine here watched 3 of your men come into her shop asking questions Wednesday. We got a text message threatening her sent from a number registered to your nephew Cole. And we got you right now, standing in a civilian's parking lot with 6 armed men, finishing the job you started on a public road." He was breathing hard, pain and fury both thick in his voice. "This isn't a club dispute anymore, Dutch. This is attempted murder. And it's about to become something every county sheriff between here and the state line has to answer for, whether they want to or not." That was when the second set of headlights appeared. Spinning blue and red this time, cutting through the rain, 3 sheriff's cruisers rolling to a stop at the edge of the gravel lot. Sheriff Purvis stepped out, hand resting easy near his sidearm, taking in the scene with the weary expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else on a wet Friday night. "Somebody want to explain to me," he said slowly, "why I got what looks like a small war parked outside Ray Fontaine's old shop?" It was Odessa who answered, stepping forward before anyone else could, voice steadier than she felt. "Sheriff, this man," she pointed at Dutch, "and his people tried to kill Mr. Boone here Tuesday night on Route 9, past the Baptist camp. Left him for dead in a ditch. I found him, I took him in, and today his people threatened me directly to try and hand him back over." "That true?" Purvis asked Silas. "Every word," Silas said. "And I got the stitches and the busted ribs to prove it, if you want to call a doctor out to confirm." Sheriff Purvis's eyes moved slowly over the scene. Dutch and his 6 men, sweating despite the cold rain, boxed in on one side by 24 iron shepherds, and on the other by 3 cruisers, and something in his weathered face shifted, the look of a man doing quick math on which side of this had the numbers, the witnesses, and the truth. "Dutch Callahan," he said, "you're going to want to come with us real quiet-like. Save everybody a whole lot of paperwork." For a long, tense moment, Nobody moved. Dutch's eyes swept the lot. His own men, badly outnumbered, the shepherds, immovable, the cruisers, waiting, and something in him seemed to collapse inward, 40 years of resentment finally meeting a wall it couldn't push through. "This isn't over," he muttered as deputies moved in to cuff him. "No," Silas agreed quietly, watching his old friend, old brother, be led toward a cruiser in handcuffs. "It's not, but it's about to be over the right way, Dutch. The way it should have been from the start." The gravel lot slowly emptied of tension over the following hour. Dutch and his men loaded into cruisers, statements taken, Preacher and his riders standing patient guard the entire time, like sentries who had no intention of leaving until every last piece of business was properly settled. Odessa found herself sitting on the tailgate of her own tow truck, wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from somewhere, watching the whole scene with the strange, hollow calm that follows terror once it's finally passed. Silas sat beside her, exhausted, pale, but alive in a way that felt different now. Safer, lighter, like a weight he'd been carrying alone for months had finally been set down and shared. Preacher Whitfield walked over and crouched in front of her, his weathered face gentler now than it had been facing down Dutch's men, the silver cross at his neck catching the last of the cruiser lights. "Miss Fontaine," he said, "I don't guess I've properly introduced myself. Marcus Whitfield. Folks call me Preacher, on account of I used to be one, long time ago, before life took me down a different road." He extended a hand, and she shook it, still a little numb. "I want you to know something, and I want you to hear it plain. What you did Tuesday night, taking in a stranger, a white man you'd never met, at real risk to yourself, when every ounce of sense might have told you to look the other way, that's not something this club is going to let pass quiet. Not because we owe you a transaction, because it's the kind of thing that deserves honoring, and honoring folks the right way is about the only religion I got left in me. I don't need honoring, Mr. Whitfield. I need to know my shop's safe and my cousin's safe, and this is actually over." "It's over," Preacher said. "Dutch's whole operation's about to come apart at the seams. We already got 3 of his lieutenants ready to talk. Once word gets out he's in custody, men who never wanted a piece of what he was running in the first place, just went along scared of crossing him. That part of this, I promise you, is handled." He rose, knees cracking, and looked out at the long line of headlights still waiting patient on Route 9. "The other part, the honoring part, that's something different altogether. And I'd be lying if I told you it was something you get much say in stopping. Once word travels through 500 men about what you did for our president." "You could have told me it had come to this," she said to Silas. "Sheriffs, cuffs, half your club rolling up on my shop like the cavalry. Would you have believed me if I had?" She thought about it honestly. Probably not. "Then I made the right call keeping it to myself." He managed a tired smile. "For what it's worth, Miss Fontaine, Odessa, I don't have the words to properly thank you for what you did. Not just Tuesday night, every day since. You had every reason to turn me away and not a single reason to keep me safe. And you did it anyway, at real cost to yourself and your business." "You were bleeding in a ditch," Odessa said simply. "Wasn't a hard call." "It was the hardest kind of call there is," Silas said. "The kind that costs you something and you make it anyway because it's right, not because it's easy." He looked out at the line of headlights still idling along Route 9, dozens of his brothers standing watch in the rain for a woman most of them had never met. "There's something coming, Odessa. Something I need you to let happen if you'll let it. Something this club owes you and owes your daddy's memory. That goes well past a simple thank you." "Mr. Boone, I don't want—" "I know what you don't want," he said gently. "You don't want a debt. You don't want a spectacle. I heard you the first time you said it, back at the church, near as Preacher told me." His pale eyes found hers, steady and warm despite everything the night had cost him. "But some things aren't about what you want, Odessa Fontaine. Some things are about what's owed and what's right, and letting folks who love you show it the only way they know how." Rain kept falling, soft now, gentler than it had been all week, and somewhere down the long dark line of motorcycles idling on Route 9, 500 voices, 500 lives Silas Boone had built into something greater than any one man, were already beginning to hear the story of a mechanic's daughter who'd pulled a bleeding stranger out of a ditch and refused to let him go, no matter what it cost her. Preacher had already made the calls, riding a little way down the road for privacy, his voice carrying low and urgent through the rain. Chapter presidents in 3 states were waking their people, passing word down through the ranks the way it had always traveled in the Shepherds, not through phones and group texts, but through voices, rider to rider, brother to brother, until the whole family knew. A woman in Comfort, Georgia had saved their founder's life and asked for nothing in return. That kind of story didn't stay contained. By the time Odessa finally climbed down off the tailgate near 2 in the morning, bone-tired and aching in ways she didn't have names for, Preacher was already back, a strange, soft look on his face. "They're coming," he told Silas quietly, thinking Odessa was out of earshot. "All of them, every chapter that can make the ride. Word's already halfway to the West Coast." Odessa heard it anyway, and something in her chest tightened. Not fear this time, but a feeling she didn't quite have a name for yet, something between wonder and dread. She thought about the shop, about how small it had always felt to her. 1 bay, 4 lifts, a waiting room with 3 mismatched chairs and a coffee maker that only worked half the time. She thought about what it would mean for hundreds of motorcycles to descend on a gravel lot built to hold maybe a dozen customer cars on a busy Saturday. She thought about Comfort itself, a town of 1,100 people who'd never seen more than a handful of strangers pass through at once, and what it would do to the quiet rhythm of the place to have 500 outsiders roll down Main Street. "It's too much," she said quietly to Silas, once Preacher had stepped away again to coordinate with the last of the departing cruisers. "Whatever they're planning, it's too much, Mr. Boone. I don't need a parade. I don't need 500 strangers descending on my town." "I understand the fear," Silas said gently, "but I'd ask you to consider something before you turn it away. These riders, most of them got nobody left to be proud of. Nobody left who sees the good in what they've built with their lives, because the world looks at leather and tattoos and hears the word biker and decides it already knows the whole story. What you did for me, Odessa, gives every single one of them a chance to be something better than what the world assumes of them, if only for 1 day. A chance to show up for somebody who deserves showing up for, and be seen doing it right." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "It's not really about you when you get down to it, though you're the reason it's happening. It's about letting 500 people remember why they wear that patch in the first place." Odessa sat with that a long moment, watching the last of the sheriff's cruisers pull away, tail lights fading down Route 9 same as Dutch's had 4 nights before, though this time nobody watching felt afraid of what those lights meant. "All right," she said finally, quiet but certain. "Let 'em come. But somebody better warn Miss Odell before 500 motorcycles roll past her porch, or she's liable to have a heart attack thinking the rapture done started without her." Silas laughed, real and warm, the sound of a man who'd gotten his life back in more ways than one that night. "I'll have Preacher call ahead," he said. "We'll try not to give the whole town a fright." Odessa didn't know it yet, sitting on that tailgate in the fading rain. But by Sunday morning, all 500 of them would be coming to Comfort, Georgia. And they weren't coming for a fight. They were coming to say thank you in the only language the Iron Shepherds had ever truly known how to speak. Sunday morning, Comfort. Georgia woke to a sound it had never heard before. Thunder, low and distant at first, rolling steady out of the east where Route 9 curved past the county line. Folks on their way to early service stepped out onto porches, squinting toward the sound, trying to place it. Not a storm. The sky was clear, pale gold with sunrise, not a cloud in sight. Engines. Hundreds of them. Odessa was standing in the doorway of her garage when the first riders crested the hill, and she would tell people for years afterward that she felt the sound before she heard it. A vibration low in her chest, in the concrete under her boots, in the old Coca-Cola clock ticking its 4-minute slow rhythm on the wall behind her. They came in formation, chapter by chapter, flags snapping in the morning breeze, the Iron Shepherd's colors, a shepherd's crook wrapped in barbed wire, 40 years of history stitched into leather. Silas Boone rode near the front, heeling but upright, astride a borrowed bike with his splinted hand wrapped carefully around the throttle, Preacher riding at his shoulder. 500 motorcycles. 500 men and women, because Odessa would learn that day that the shepherds counted plenty of women among their ranks, riders who'd earned their patches the same hard way as everyone else. They filled Route 9 for the better part of a mile, rolling slow and solemn past the little Baptist churches with their doors standing open, past Miss Odell's house, past the blinking light at the center of town, until they reached the gravel lot outside Fontaine Auto Repair, and one by one, in perfect unhurried order, cut their engines to silence. The whole town had come out to watch by then. Pastor Whitlow stood on the church steps with half his congregation, still in their Sunday best. Miss Odell clutched her purse to her chest, tears already standing in her eyes, though the morning had barely started. Thaddeus stood beside Odessa in the garage doorway, mouth hanging open at the sheer scale of what was rolling toward them. Silas Boone dismounted first, walking slow and steady toward the woman who'd saved his life, the entire congregation of iron shepherds falling into respectful silence behind him. "Miss Fontaine," he said, loud enough for the whole gathered crowd to hear. "Odessa, 6 days ago, you found a stranger dying in a ditch on the side of your road, and instead of walking past, instead of calling it somebody else's problem, you carried him into your own shop and you saved his life, at real risk to your own. You did it not knowing who I was, not knowing what it might cost you, not asking a single thing in return." He turned, gesturing to the sea of riders behind him. "These are my brothers and sisters, 500 of them, give or take, from 12 chapters across 6 states. And every single one of them rode through the night and the morning to be standing here right now, because in this family, we don't let a debt like that go unanswered." Odessa felt her throat tighten, felt Thaddeus's hand find her shoulder, steady and warm. "We heard," Silas continued, "that this shop, your daddy's shop, the one you fought 2 banks and a highway chain half your life just to keep the lights on in, carries a loan balance still. We heard the roof's been needing repair since the spring storms, and you've been putting it off, patching leaks instead of fixing them right, because every dollar goes back into keeping this place standing for the customers who depend on it." He nodded, and from the front row of riders, a woman stepped forward carrying a thick manila envelope, and behind her, more riders began dismounting, some carrying tool bags, some carrying lumber and shingles they'd apparently loaded onto trailers somewhere along the long ride down. "That loan's paid off," Silas said simply, and Odessa's knees nearly buckled beneath her. "Paid in full this morning by wire transfer before we ever left the state line. That roof's getting fixed today. We brought 60 men who know their way around a hammer same as they know their way around an engine, and it'll be done before sundown, and there's something else." He reached into his vest and produced a small wooden box, worn smooth with age, and opened it to reveal a key. Old brass, clearly decades old. "This belonged to my own daddy's shop," Silas said, voice thick now with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide. "Small garage outside Macon closed down 40 years back when he passed and none of us kids wanted the burden of keeping it running. I've carried this key every day since, telling myself one day I'd find somebody who deserved to carry what it means more than I ever did." He pressed it into Odessa's palm, her fingers closing around metal warmed by his own hand. "You keep your daddy's legacy running the way I couldn't keep mine, Odessa Fontaine. And you know, from this day forward, that every single person standing in this lot and every chapter of the Iron Shepherds from here to the coast considers Fontaine Auto Repair Family Shop. Any shepherd rolling through Georgia needs work done. They come here first. Any trouble ever finds its way to your door again, you got 500 phone numbers standing between you and being alone in it." Odessa stood in the gravel lot, key clutched in one hand, tears finally spilling over despite every effort she'd made to hold them back, and looked out over a sea of leather-clad strangers who had ridden through the night to stand in her father's parking lot and call her family. "I didn't do this for a reward," she managed, voice breaking. "We know," Preacher said, stepping up beside Silas. "That's exactly why you're getting one." The town of Comfort, Georgia, had never seen a day quite like the one that followed. 60 iron shepherds spent the morning up on the roof of Fontaine Auto Repair, tearing off old shingles and laying new ones with the easy competence of men who'd built lives with their hands. Others set up grills in the gravel lot, And by noon, the smell of barbecue was drifting clear across town, drawing in townsfolk who'd started the morning wary of the leather-clad strangers and ended it sharing plates and stories with them like old neighbors. Pastor Whitlow held an impromptu blessing right there in the parking lot, 500 bikers and half the congregation of Mount Nebo Baptist bowing their heads together under the Georgia sun. And Odessa would say later that it was the strangest and most beautiful church service she'd ever attended in her life. "Lord," Whitlow prayed, voice carrying easy over the hushed lot, "we thank you for reminding this town on this particular Sunday that you still work through unexpected hands, through a mechanic's daughter with grease under her nails, through 500 strangers in leather who rode through the night for a debt of love, not obligation. We thank you that kindness, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's frightening, still finds its way home." A chorus of amens rolled through the crowd, bikers and churchgoers alike, and more than one hardened rider was seen wiping his eyes discreetly beneath mirrored sunglasses. Miss Odell made her way through the crowd afterward, insisting on personally thanking every biker she could get her hands on, informing them all in no uncertain terms that Ray Fontaine's girl deserved every bit of this, and then some, until half the club had heard the full history of Ray Fontaine and his shop secondhand from a 70-year-old woman clutching a church fan. Children from the neighborhood, wide-eyed and fearless, the way only children can be around something as enormous as 500 motorcycles, spent the afternoon getting careful, closely supervised rides up and down the block on the backs of bikes, parents watching nervous and delighted in equal measure. By evening, 3 separate cookouts had merged into one enormous gathering that spilled from the gravel lot onto the church grounds next door, gospel music drifting from somebody's truck speakers, mixing easy with classic rock from another, an unlikely soundtrack for an unlikely day. Odessa moved through it all in a daze that slowly, gradually, softened into something like joy. Real joy. The kind she hadn't let herself feel fully since her daddy passed, because feeling it always seemed to invite the reminder of who wasn't there to share it. But watching Thaddeus laughing with a shepherd twice his age over engine specs, watching Pastor Whitlow deep in conversation with preacher about scripture and brotherhood, watching her father's shop bathed in golden evening light with a brand new roof and a debt finally cleared, she let herself feel it anyway. Let herself believe, if only for that one long golden afternoon, that some kinds of joy were allowed to exist right alongside grief, rather than waiting politely for grief to finish first. Dutch Callahan's arrest made the county paper by Monday, and within a week, federal investigators were looking into the full scope of the Blackthorn Riders' operations, aided by testimony from 3 of Dutch's own lieutenants who'd been waiting years for a chance to walk away clean. Justice, when it finally came slow and thorough and real, not the swift, satisfying kind of a single punch thrown, but the kind that actually held, built on evidence and testimony, and a system finally forced to pay attention because 500 witnesses refused to let it look away. Silas Boone stayed in comfort 3 extra days, healing before the club began the long ride home, and on his last evening in town, he found Odessa alone in the garage bay, running her hand along the freshly repaired roofline visible through the open door, the brass key from his father's shop sitting heavy and warm in her jeans pocket. "You gonna be all right?" he asked. "I think so," Odessa said. "Still feels like a dream, half of it. 6 days ago I was just trying to keep the lights on. Now I got 500 family members I never knew I had." Silas nodded slowly, looking around the bay at the tools hung on their pegboard outlines, the old Coca-Cola clock still ticking 4 minutes slow, the filing cabinet full of her father's handwriting. "Your daddy," he said carefully. "He sounds like he was a man who understood something most folks spend a whole lifetime trying to learn. That the value of a life isn't measured by what you managed to hoard for yourself. It's measured by how wide you left the door open for everybody else." He looked at her. "You carry that the same way you carry his tools, Odessa. I saw it the first night, even bleeding half to death in your garage. Saw a woman who'd been raised right by somebody who understood what mattered." "He used to say grief leaves you room," she said quietly, the words coming easier now than they had in years. "Told me what I put in that room was up to me. I filled it with engines, mostly. Didn't know what else to do with it." Engines are honest work, Silas said. Nothing wrong with filling grief with something honest. But I'd wager watching you this week, that room's got a little more in it now than just engines. His pale eyes were warm, fatherly in a way that caught her off guard. Family's got a way of moving into rooms grief leaves empty, if you let it. Don't matter if that family shows up on 2 legs or 500 motorcycles. Odessa felt her throat tighten again, and this time she didn't fight the tears that came. Thank you, she said, for trusting me that first night, for not letting me talk myself out of helping you. Thank you, Silas said, for being exactly the kind of person this whole tired old world needs more of. He rose slowly from the recliner, testing his healing ribs, and extended his good hand. Ride's leaving at first light, but this isn't goodbye, Odessa Fontaine, not by a long shot. You got my number now, and every shepherd between here and the Carolinas knows your name and your shop. You need anything at all, for the rest of your life. You call, and somebody comes. That's how it starts most times, Silas said, settling into the old recliner one last time, the same one she'd first laid him down in, healed now, whole, a different man than the broken one she'd found in the ditch. One person deciding to do the hard right thing instead of the easy nothing. Rest just kind of follows from there, if you let it. Odessa looked at the recliner, at the man sitting in it, at the shop around them both, her daddy's shop still standing, roof fixed, debt cleared, name intact, and thought about the room grief leaves you and what you choose to put in it. She'd filled hers with engines once because engines were simple and grief was not. But sitting there that evening, watching an old biker she'd pulled out of a ditch 6 days ago get ready to ride home, surrounded by 500 people who loved him, she understood that her daddy had been trying to tell her something bigger than engines all those years ago. He'd been trying to tell her that the room grief leaves you is exactly where love moves in, if you're brave enough to leave the door open for it. Dawn came gray and gentle the morning the shepherds rode out, mist still clinging low to the fields along Route 9. Odessa stood in the doorway of the garage in the same spot where, 6 days earlier, she'd raised a hand trying to stop 500 bikers she didn't yet understand. Now she raised that same hand differently, not in warning, but in farewell, watching Silas Boone lead his family out of comfort the same unhurried way they'd arrived. He paused his bike beside her before pulling onto the road, engine idling low. "One more thing," he said, reaching into his vest and producing a small, folded photograph, worn soft at the corners. "This was my daddy, outside his shop, the year before it closed. Kept it in that box with the key all these years. Figured it belonged with the key now, wherever that key ended up." Odessa took the photograph carefully. A young man in coveralls, grinning wide beside a garage door not so different from her own, decades of Georgia sun already fading the edges of the image. "I'll put it up next to my daddy's picture," she said. "Let 'em keep each other company." "Fittin'," Silas said, voice thick. He looked at her a long moment, the kind of look that carried more than words usually could. "You take care of yourself, Odessa Fontaine, and you take care of this shop. Whole club's gonna be checking in on both, whether you ask us to or not." "Wouldn't have it any other way," she said, and meant it. He nodded once, pulled his sunglasses down against the rising sun, and rolled out onto Route 9. Behind him, chapter by chapter, the long line of iron shepherds fell into formation and followed, engines swelling to that same low thunder that had first announced them, fading now, slowly, back into the ordinary quiet of a small Georgia town returning to itself. Odessa stood in the doorway until the very last tail light disappeared over the hill, the brass key warm in one hand, her father's picture, and Silas's father's picture already finding their place side by side in her mind. Two men who'd built something honest with their hands, watching over the daughter and the friend who'd carried their legacies forward. Thaddeus came to stand beside her eventually, quiet for once, watching the empty road same as she was. "Reckon things go back to normal now?" he asked. Odessa thought about that. Thought about the roof over their heads, paid for and solid. Thought about the loan, cleared. Thought about 500 phone numbers she now had reason to call if trouble ever came knocking again. Thought about a brass key from a dead man's shop in Macon. and a photograph of a stranger who'd become family in the span of 6 impossible days. "No," she said finally, a small, tired, genuine smile finding her face for the first time in almost a week. "I don't reckon they do. I think normal just got a whole lot bigger than it used to be." That final image, Odessa standing in the doorway of her father's garage, hand raised in farewell as 500 motorcycles rolled slowly back down Route 9 into the golden light of a Georgia morning, engines rumbling low like distant thunder fading toward the horizon, became, in its own quiet way, the thing this whole town would remember. Not the fear of that first Tuesday night, not the tension of Dutch Callahan's men standing in her lot, but this. A woman who'd opened her door to a stranger, and a family 500 strong who'd ridden through the night to make sure she never had to wonder again whether kindness was worth the risk. The brass key still hangs on a hook by the register at Fontaine Auto Repair, right beside the shop's original set. A quiet reminder of the night an old biker bled in a ditch, and a mechanic's daughter decided that some doors, once you open them for the right reasons, are worth keeping open no matter what rolls up outside. So here's the question this story leaves you with, friend, and I want you to sit with it a moment before you scroll on. How many times in your own life has a stranger needed exactly the kind of help that costs you something real to give? And what did you decide to do about it? Odessa Fontaine didn't know, that rainy Tuesday night, that helping a bleeding stranger would bring 500 bikers rolling down her road in gratitude. She just knew a man was hurting, and she had the room in her heart and in her daddy's old garage to help him anyway. Maybe that's the whole lesson, right there. You don't do the right thing because you know how it ends. You do it because it's right, and you trust that the ending, whatever it is, will take care of itself. If this story moved you the way it moved me telling it, do an old storyteller a favor. Drop a comment below and tell me. Would you have opened that door? And while you're at it, share this one with somebody who needs reminding that kindness, even the risky, inconvenient, middle-of-the-night kind, still finds its way back around. Until the next story, friend, stay blessed, stay kind, and keep that door open just a little wider than feels comfortable. You never know who might need it.